Welcome, Ben. I'd say I've had the pleasure of sitting down with Ben and getting the tour of the business a couple of times. And one thing I find about you, Ben, is you're always abundant with your information and you're willing to share everything. There's no secrets. You live in that sort of abundant mindset, and I'm sure today will be no different. And you're going to provide a load of value to these guys. So in terms of, I guess my first question is around, that whole, financial piece and your bigger why behind what you do. Because in our conversations, you never talk about the dollar, you never talk about profitability. It's always about the purpose for your business. So expand on your why.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the opportunity first and foremost, Ross. Look, I mean, the North Star for us and the reason why I got so interested in this particular area is, I didn't grow up poor or disadvantaged. I grew up in a lower middle class area of northern suburbs of Melbourne. My dad was very tight with the money. Mum loved to spend and make sure that we were provided for. So there was arguments in the household all the time about money, which was never great. Mind you, they've just celebrated their 50th year wedding anniversary, so that's all still going okay. But I just, I had an underlying, understanding there that I didn't necessarily want to have to worry about money. But like a lot of people in households, you get this situation where, we learn from our parents, we learn and observe from them. So money was this topic that really controlled my dad. And I thought, there's obviously got to be a better way. And I've just gone on that journey of reprogramming my mindset around how I look at money and how I want to control it rather than it controlling me. But then obviously that was part of the vision for the business when I started in 2004, originally with Mortgage Choice, was that everybody had the ability to achieve financial well-being. So it's just about the decisions that you make with your money that allow you to work that out. Like most people are going to earn over $4 million over their working life. So it's a choice about how you work with that money and how you make that money work for yourself. It's probably over 5 million now. That data was probably 10, 12 years old when we did that analysis. So what your choices are is really about what you do with that money. And so that's about delayed gratification. That's about trade-offs. That's about rational versus irrational behavior. And then it is about how do you program the narrative around that. So, I'm a big believer in, Jamie Fraser's story, state, strategy approach. So what story are you telling yourself? What's the strategy that you're sort of putting around that? And, and what is that process? What narrative are you talking to yourself? And you can move that narrative around to make sure that it's suiting your ultimate goal. And he tells a really good story about he was a marathon runner and, he thought he really wanted to win a marathon, right? That was one of his big goals. And so this was his story. And, the strategy around that was preparation, work, effort, timing. And he thought he was going to the Townsville Marathon and he was a favourite to win. But then all of a sudden one Ethiopian runner turned up and no one thought he was going to be there. And so it just blew his mind. And so ultimately he ran one of the worst marathons he's ever run. But then he had to focus on just turning that narrative around and sort of say, actually, I've come second. That's pretty good. And you just keep moving that narrative to make sure that you keep having that thought process of abundance and optimization and being optimistic about things. And if you can continue to focus on that and you put some systems and processes in behind that, you really can start to, personally get the best out of yourself, and then ultimately you can focus on the business story around that. So our North Star is about this idea that we can help households better manage their money and then invest that money so that money works harder for them. And the vehicle we use for that is leveraged property. And that sort of allows us to accelerate that outcome for customers.
Yeah, love it. Love it. So what was it? Story, state, strategy. What was the thing? Yeah, so story, state, strategy. So what story are you telling yourself? So if you're telling yourself limited stories or you're pessimistic or, there's all of these barriers in your story, then naturally you are going to be a product of the story that you tell yourself, right? And obviously, state is about, well, how do I get myself in the right state of mind to be able to overcome some of those barriers? And then the strategy is about, okay, well, I know the story, there's the state,
And then what are the things I'm going to do to build those habits up and change those behaviours around what that looks like. So it's a really simple program or a system that works really well.
So yeah, you mentioned financial freedom, giving people choices, and do you work with them on their story, state, and strategy, or is that something you more work on yourself around?
No, we definitely, I mean, as part of the program of work that we're going to be doing with clients who want a high touch experience with our group, it's very much understanding their personal goals and how their financial goals move into that particular story. So we refer to this as big rocks in the jar, you know, and then so what are the things that are going to make your life more successful, enjoyable? What sort of experiences are you going to have? So we're very anti-rich, possessions, more so around experiences and connection and those types of things. So when we get a household together and we start to unpack that particular story, that's the starting point for us in terms of working out, all right, well, if we're going to build a long-term plan, how does that align to the ultimate goals that you're trying to set? So the property plans and the property strategies that we do are very much intertwined with the goals the family are trying to achieve. So that could be upgrade the family home, buy your first home, how many children are you going to have, what sort of education program are they going to have, what sort of life events are you planning for, what sort of money do we need for those life events. So we could have potentially 20 or 30 future life events that we've costed in terms of private school to 10th wedding anniversaries to paying for your children's first car to paying some money for their weddings. So it's effectively a full sort of 50-year sort of model that we were able to then measure cash flows to allow for us to then go to work in terms of how we can optimize their money based on that particular story.
Yeah, awesome. And I've seen this system, and you've again shown me under the hood of that. The tech that you've built that actually gives this, this runway for the clients and this plan to follow. And I think that sort of leads into that business model. And I love your business model in terms of the funnel, right? In terms of, they come in the property plan, they do the property plan, they go to the mortgage broker, he works out how much they can buy, it goes to the buyer's agent, who then is able to source the property, then we want to protect it, it goes to the financial planning, and then, hey, we want to do the compliance, and we've got the accountancy practice, right? So it's a holistic sort of funnel that you've created to look after this journey for clients. So do you want to talk a little bit more about that and the strategy behind it?
Yeah, sure. So I'll talk about the frameworks, and then I'll try and put the overall arching strategy across the top of it. So there's a couple of frameworks that we work with. Inside the Empower business, we have our 5-step proven process, right? So that's clarify, evaluate, plan, implement, and manage. Okay, so let's go through that. So the clarify is what we just talked about. So that's the why are we here? What goals are we trying to achieve in the short, medium, and longer term? So clarify. Then evaluate. Well, let's see if we can look at the numbers and see exactly what's possible, what's plausible in your situation. Do we have to have an honest conversation? Is there amazing opportunity and potential here? So they're the types of things. So clarify, evaluate, plan, and then from that, it's like, well, we've got an idea of what we need to do. Let's now plan that out and put some rigor around that plan. And so that's obviously when we do all the analysis, build the scenario models, do all the cash flow analysis around that. And that basically then allows us to have that plan. And then from plan, it's effectively moving to action. So we call that implementation. So implementation is step number 4. And so that is about, the rubber hitting the road, making sure that we're putting all of those steps together. And then number 5 is manage. And manage is really about checking in, making sure that everything's working as planned, and any tweaking that needs to go on. So that's review, and then adjust as needed to obviously navigate us on this pathway, because there's always going to be things in our life that pop up. So when you're doing especially long-term modelling, you know, all of it's an estimated guide and projection in terms of where they're going. So that's the 5-step process from the business's point of view. In terms of from the customer, and another one of our frameworks is our ABCD. So asset selection, borrowing power, cash flow, and defence. So, you know, if we're going to get people into a lot of debt and, you know, think about cash on cash return, and that's where leverage is so good. That's why we prefer residential property over getting people into leverage shares or anything crazy like that. There's just too much volatility in that space. So, you know, the idea that's asset selection, borrowing power, cash flow, and defence. Now, that's obviously, it works nice as a framework A, B, C, D, but the actual order is C, number 1. So while Ross is writing this down, that's number 1. Cash flow is always king because we've got to work out whether it's plausible. Number 2 is borrowing power. So what can we afford to buy so we can optimise to a reasonable level? Then obviously the asset selection is number 3. And then to Ross's point, number 4 is defence. And so the way in which customers might, you know, ring us up or request an appointment with us is they're usually coming to us for property investment advice. So when we're sitting down and having that conversation, we have, you know, the clarify, the evaluate, we take them through that process. We then engage the client to potentially do a plan. And then obviously then that sets us off in, have you got a mortgage broker? Yes, we do. That's great. We're very happy to work with external mortgage brokers. So, you know, we want to let them know, you know, of the work we're going to do, but we need the borrowing assessment, the indicative borrowing assessment from a third-party broker. Or obviously if they don't, they want to bring it all in-house, then they'll use our broker. And that broker will then do the indicative lending that will be tested against the models that are built in the simulator. Now, the simulator has all of the models in there, but we want to always use a specialist rather than a generalist to be providing that advice. So we'll get that modelled in. With the buyer's agents, we'll automatically add the fee in for any recommendation that we make. And then the same with the income protection trauma, TPD, we'll get those indicative quotes from our financial planners and we'll model those in. So all of a sudden the household gets to see effectively the greater story, and the invisible has now become visible. And that is the biggest sort of movement of opportunity that they see in terms of, wow, this is all potentially going to come together. So rather than sort of one big, you know, premature selling pitch at the start, they're taken through a program and a process, and that makes them obviously more engaged in that process, more excited about the outcome, visualizing that outcome, and ultimately that allows us to then perform the majority of those duties on behalf of the client. And then, you know, if we think about the tax piece, you know, that's the ongoing sort of work that we're doing with them. The financial planners would be doing annual reviews. Brokers are probably doing 12 to 18 month reviews as part of that as well, in terms of that. And to put all of that together, we've obviously built a client platform that's meshed all of those things together. So now that client platform is called More. The original name of it was the My Wealth Portal, but we've rebranded that at the end of last year to More, because not only is it a client platform for the Empower Wealth business, it's now actually a public platform on the back of the Make Money Simple Again book and on the back of the Money Smart system. So that is now becoming what I would consider a upstream strategy, where we're now getting those customers earlier in the process, where we can potentially analyse their situation, or the user of the platform, and then potentially show them opportunities in terms of what that looks like. So that is part of our broader strategy, which is with open banking coming, with, you know, the likes of CBA making, you know, big, you know, inroads into their technology, and them being able to see basically all the lending of the other banks. We already know they're doing it, right? As brokers, we already know that, you know, they're identifying other loans that customer on their platform has got, and they're offering them better deals and trying to ingest all of those clients into their ecosystem. It's you know, from a business point of view, you can be you can sort of be angry with CBA, but also you've got to be admirational to them. I mean, their strategy is miles ahead of every other bank at the moment. And so we're doing a similar strategy, which is we're basically saying that wherever you are on the life journey, we'll be able to understand intent, and then we'll be able to serve an opportunity up based on the analysis that we do throughout the platform around their financial story and their goals and their intentions around that. So we know that that's going to be coming more broadly across the industry as it matures in terms of its technology development. So we're just sort of trying to push ahead and be an early adopter in that space.
Yeah, love it. And I just want to stop there, right? Because even in the first, 10, 15 minutes, there's been so much gold that you've sort of delivered. And so I don't want to slow down and sort of unpack some of the stuff that you've just said, right? So, financial freedom is the aim, and it's all about empowering customer with choices. And to be able to do that, we have to have deeper conversations, and the deeper conversations isn't about getting rich, isn't about creating wealth. It's around sort of really understanding their life. And I say to my guys on the program all the time, right? You can't be shallow and deep at the same time. And we talk a lot about relationship sales. So the brokers that focus on the transactional level, as what you're saying plays out, aren't going to have the same ability to withstand what's going to come in 20 years in the future, right?
Correct.
So right now they need to focus on really understanding that client's story and then creating a strategy. The thing that Ben's done really well that I love here is sort of looking at those. You've got a couple of things in terms of internally. You've got some systems that you do: clarify, evaluate, plan, implement, and manage. And then from a client's perspective, we've got a ABCD, right? And then, you've got how many people on the portal now? Something like 40,000 people on the portal?
Yeah. So it's coming up to, we adjusted it because there was a lot of people that get a free account on our platform when they download one of the books. So we've stripped all them out. And so we're at about 30,000 of people who have logged into the platform. And there's probably about 12 to 15,000 of those who are quite active on there, where we've got a really good story of their financial position. So to give you some idea, there's just on $16 billion worth of mortgages on that platform.
Yeah. So these are people that aren't customers, right? They just have put their data because they want to put their information, because Ben's created a really great tech portal where they can sort of manage their finances and see how they're tracking and see how their wealth's created. They've got, voluntarily put information in that portal. So that allows Ben to then market to those people to then go through the range of services, right? And you've also told me in the past that the podcast, if someone's listening to your podcast, and I heard something the other day that said if someone's had 7 hours worth of interaction, the chance of, converting goes sky high, right? So then this all feeds into the funnel where, the business of the property plan, of the finance goes in the simulator. You put in the finance from the broking. You put in the protection costs from the financial planning. Then, they're happy with the plan, and it goes through the buyer's agent, it goes through the financial planner, goes through the tax, and then we do the annual reviews and monitor the plan, right? So as I saw a comment in the chat saying, and again, I've seen a lot of businesses, but I love this model, right? I love it. And I think I've said to you before, it's because you've created that strategic advantage. And I know how much you've invested in tech as well. It's hard to compete, right?
Yeah, it is a little bit. But the reality is, we are all, if 2/3 of businesses now are written through brokers, unfortunately, it does mean that sometimes we are taking business off each other, right? It's no longer are we taking businesses directly off banks. And so you need to make sure that your value proposition really does stack up, because if it's just, no one, we always use the analogy, right? No one wants the drill bit. They want the hole in the wall. No one really wants the mortgage. Even our clients who are trying to create financial freedom, they don't want the debt. But unfortunately, the debt is helping them accelerate into that story. So you need to make sure that you need to understand that really the mortgage is a commodity. And the biggest value we have as brokers is the fact that we have choice across that commodity, right? So we'll always be trusted more than the banks in terms of working in the best interest of the customer. So you need to make sure that whatever value proposition that you're putting forward to your clients and your prospects is that you can clearly articulate that value that you're bringing to them, right? And obviously the basic layups are around time, convenience, doing the shopping for them. But if you want to survive and thrive in the next 5 to 10 years, you need to make sure that you're stacking that value and you're really communicating that effectively in terms of the movement that you're making for that customer. Because if you're thinking that, you know, the customers of tomorrow are going to still not know what offsets are, still will not know how you structure for cross-securitization or whatever that may be, most of those are going to be quite informed. And all the research is pointing to the fact that that more and more research is being done before they actually come and speak to us. So as brokers, so we've got to be really clear about making sure that we're not transactional, that we're making sure, to Ross's point, that we're totally relationship. You know, I want you to think of me as your personal banker. Anything to do with your banking, I want you to think of me. You know, if you've ever had a personal banker before with a bank, I promise you they won't be there in 18 months. They would have been moved on, reshuffled around the business. I'm going to be here in the long term to look after you. It's that value proposition that the customer's got to be looking for, because if you don't deliver that, then your client is going to be susceptible to a better value proposition from another supplier.
Yeah, definitely. And you're so right. And again, I love the value proposition that you've created, and again, how clearly defined you have made it. So in terms of, obviously you've got the whole thing and we understand the structure, but let's narrow down more on your mortgage broking business, because obviously everyone in the room here is mortgage brokers. And so in terms of retention of staff, you've done that really, really well over the years. And, you know, speak to us a bit about that sort of career pathway and sort of how you sort of onboard and what the journey is for a mortgage broker within Empower Wealth.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Ross. I mean, look, having started as a brokerage in 2004, and, you know, when I first started to employ, I went down the contractor model. And so I've learned through trial and error, just like everybody else potentially has, in terms of the types of model that's going to be the most effective for us and what didn't work for us. And so early on, when we did have the contractors, so that sort of served its purpose on in the earlier stages. But we knew once we were going to make these big investments into, you know, building out a sustainable competitive advantage, that you do need to make investments back into the business, and you can't just be looking at, you know, the profit line and saying, we'll just keep taking that off. So the strategy that I've used is, in terms of building out a partnership of services, there are now other partners in the business. And in terms of specifically for the mortgage broking business, you know, we now have PAYG brokers. That's the only brokers that we have. We don't have any referral relationships with any third party. And that's sort of logical, right? Because, you know, what other brokers going to refer to our property planning team? Because they may be thinking, well, if I do that, then they might take my brokerage business away, or they might take my tax business away, or they might take my financial planning business away. So we haven't had that sort of referral relationship story. We've had to go direct to market in terms of what that looks like. So we've had some success with obviously bringing in experienced brokers, and we've also, but we have the most success with actually breeding our own brokers. So hiring for attitude, training for skill. And so as part of that program that Ben Magnus, Jamie Sinclair and the team have put together, is that we now have this sort of broker academy. And so, like, you know, the businesses of our size, I think our team is around 37, 38 people across our brokerage business, including all support staff, is we now have them running through academy. We have the sort of business broken up into brokers. Then we have sort of associate brokers, and then we have our settlements team. Rough numbers this year, we'll do around 1.1 billion of settlements. So we will do, you start potentially in our settlements area, and then you move from that settlements area in terms of learning that discipline and all of the things you need to understand. Then you move into the associate broker seat. And then basically from the associate broker seat, you're then starting to get, experience and exposure in terms of talking to the customers. And then you move into starting to look at credit assessments and looking at serviceability calculators. And then ultimately, so by the time you move up into a broker seat, you really do understand the business back to front, and you also understand how all those pieces of the business workflow work. So by the time you're actually, sitting in front of customers, you're pretty familiar with how that process is going to play out.
Yeah. And how long do they spend in the academy?
Yeah, so it depends on obviously effort, behaviour, talent, attitude, skill. Some people take a little bit longer than others. I mean, in terms of the sort of things that I look for in high-performing brokers, I've got a list of 10 things that I look for. So we might go to that in a minute. But one of the big things that is on that list is strong communication skills and being confident in front of clients. I know when I first started at Mortgage Choice, I had my 2 weeks training, and then I was sent out and I was doing home visits. And in terms of my credit policy knowledge, my subject matter knowledge was growing but weak. Let's be honest. So I could always talk to people, so I had no problems in building rapport. But it was the confidence I had around about the problem solving and the solutions that I was offering to customers. I wasn't confident enough in those initial meetings to basically give a recommendation on the spot. So I'd always then go away, analyse it, and then come back. Now that slows the process down, right? You're not very efficient if you have to go away and do that type of analysis. So, from my point of view, that was the evolution that we were trying to build in terms of. So back to your question, Ross, was how quickly? Usually it's going to take between sort of 12 to 18 months to run through that program, in terms of getting out the other side. But some people, we still believe in all of our people, and they might take 2 years to get there. But we want them to be confident, because if they're not confident in front of clients, and if they're not singing from the same hymn sheet of what all of the knowledge and information we put out there, and if anyone knows of us, you'll know we are super content rich in terms of educational content. So, if someone's listening to our podcast, if someone's, watching our learn to videos or our how-to videos, and there's not consistency in that messaging, it's bound to be a pretty bumpy experience for that client. And obviously it's not, with over, I think about 650 5-star reviews between our 2 Sydney and Melbourne offices. It's starting to, obviously that shines through in terms of making sure that consistency of message is strong.
Love it. And so you mentioned the top 10. So what are the top 10 key things you mentioned?
Yeah, let's go through them. So excellent product knowledge.
Yeah.
So if you're not a subject matter expert in what you're talking about, you will be found out. As I said, there's a lot of people who do a lot of preliminary research now. And so you obviously need to be that subject matter experts, number one.
Yeah.
Excellent communication skills is obviously what we were talking about just then.
Yeah.
And just a point on that, just remember that 50% of the people that you might be dealing with don't like the fact that they're not in control of that process, or that, they don't do mortgages or buy houses every day of the week, right? So there's a lot of stress that's underlying that they might not be showing to you, but it's real there. So just make sure you're aware of that. In terms of timely communication, so excellent communication is one thing. Timely communication, if you're not proactively communicating with them and stepping through the process, you're missing a big opportunity to reinforce trust with you. And remember, there's this fantastic trust gauge that people work with. So that's always something. And trust in professional services that's our secret sauce, guys. If you're not trusted, or if you don't appear to hold that high trust, you're going to be exposed over time. Sound problem-solving skills. Like, we're in the business of solving people's problems. That's what we do as brokers. And in a lot of cases, we're aligning that to obviously some of the biggest purchases decisions that they're ever going to make. So we need to be confident in that particular sense. And obviously no two deals are exactly the same. So it's really important that you focus in on those problem-solving skills. Next one we've got is positive can-do attitude. I know, and I hear from my team, and I'm sure it's the same with you guys, you are working so much harder these days for success than what we had to work 5 or so years ago, right? There is a lot more effort. There's a lot more deals that don't get over the line. It's challenging, right? So you've got to be able to keep finding that get up and go energy to make sure that you can keep going. Because if you fall away on that side, your results will also fall away. Number 6 is strong systems. So making sure that, remember, systems run businesses, people run systems. So it's not the other way around. So if you've got great workflows and great systems, they will stand up as you scale up. And if they don't stand up, you're going to have to make sure that you keep adapting and changing those so they do allow for scale. So you'll have to make decisions in the future of whether you do a one-to-one sort of model, or whether you do a one-to-many, which is a queue and serve model. So as you get bigger and bigger, there really is no substitute for a queue and serve model. So what I mean by that is that as you get bigger, if you think that you can have one person to one or 2 people running to one, what you're better off doing is saying, here's the competency that I need for this particular job, training people up in competencies, and then serving up the next task to anyone that holds that competency. That means that you will run quicker and faster in terms of how many people you can serve. Because you'll always know, obviously during the COVID, we all got very busy. Your systems are only as good as when they're stress tested with the volume of work you're doing at that time. So if you're not running a queue and serve model, but you have ambition to be $1 billion brokerage under Ross's tutelage, then that's what you're going to need to look at. You're going to need to look at what competencies, and you need to train your team to those competencies, and then you need to run a queue and serve model as opposed to a one-to-one model. So that's a bit of systems advice there for you. In terms of number 7, solid work ethic. So positiveness is really good, but you still got to show up and you still got to work for it, right?
So was that strong work ethic? Is that what you said?
Well, strong, solid work ethic. Yep. So obviously we know that if you want high reward, if you want high recognition, you're going to have to work for it. I don't know anyone who hasn't, had to put the hours in. And if you look at all the high performers, they'll show you the sort of numbers they're doing. That doesn't mean you can't be smarter. And we'll talk to that point in a minute. That does flow into next one, number 8 is time management. So you do need to try and batch and organize your working week into segments of what am I doing on, for these 3 hours of the day, and get rid of the interruptions, the notifications, and so forth. The biggest problem that we have in any brokerage business is getting interrupted when you're deep in trying to solve, for maybe a person's got 2 investment properties and you're trying to work out the best way in which you can restructure this deal to get the best result for the client. If you're getting interruptions all the time, coming back into your servicing calculator, it just means you're not efficient. So try and batch your time into what you're trying to do, whether it's prospecting at one point in time and then deal orchestration at the other point in time, whatever that looks like is going to be important for success. Number 9 is continued learning and development. I am still a student of life, like is Ross, as we all are. So we're all trying to learn, we're all trying to understand, we're all trying to sort of see the future in terms of how it's going to play so we can remain relevant in that value proposition for our customers. And then obviously number 10 still comes back to this sort of idea about productivity. So I go, high productivity is number 10. So how do we become productive? And that's that dollar productive measure. So what jobs am I doing in the business as a broker? What jobs am I doing in business as a leader? What jobs am I in the business doing as administrator? So as you coordinate strong systems, you are always looking for making sure that you're doing the most dollar productive activities for the reward and effort that you're getting as part of that particular story.
Love it. So good, so good. And, I think we sing from the same song sheet, and anyone that's been part of us for a while, there's a lot of similarities to what we teach in terms of what you're saying, Ben. So, I always say the baseline of the pyramid is that strong credit and product knowledge. You win so many deals. You've got the excellent communication, trust, problem solving, positive can-do attitudes, systems. I've been talking about systems all day yesterday. The solid work.
It's always a work in progress. Unfortunately, we're debating. Again, I love to share. We run an American-based CRM system called Keep, which used to be called Infusionsoft. For those who may be familiar with it, it's a very similar system to a lot of marketers use over in the US, such as Brendan Burchard, Frank Kern, all of these sort of gurus in that sort of marketing space, but we're outgrowing it. And so, we've got to look at a system that looks at things like customer data profiles. So CDPs, I don't know whether you're familiar with, but if anyone's looking at where the future is swimming, you're looking at sort of trying to get that holistic 360 view of customer. And that's what these new sort of more advanced CRMs are looking at in terms of how you get a profile of that user moving through the web. So we're looking at Dynamic from Microsoft with its predictive AI and ML, also with the backing of ChatGPT and behind it, and also Salesforce. But that's, you've got to remember the size of the business that we are. We're 120 people. We're doing fees over 20 plus million. And so we're at that next stage in terms of what that looks like. So, but certainly, the debate we're having is because we've got multiple services. It's like, well, what do we do when we need to do the mortgage broking workflow? How does that fit into our overall strategy? So it's always a work in progress.
Oh, definitely. And I always say that, you grow to the level where you break the system, right? And you constantly need to be refining, and no matter what level you're at, right? So the one-man band outgrows him being able to do it all himself. He needs to put some systems and hire staff. You get to that sort of level where you're doing over 100 mil, and you need to get that middle level of sort of management into your team and create some new systems to get yourself out of that. And you've grown out of the CEO role now, and you're the founder, and you're working on higher level stuff. And you actually mentioned to me last time I was down there that, hey, you don't view yourself as a financial services company anymore. You view yourself as a tech company.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, ultimately, the business that we're in is the hopes and dreams business for our clients. I mean, and that's not something we came up with. It's something that Packer said many years ago to, I think it was to Mark Boris.
Boris, yeah, we did that.
Where he said, you're going into the mortgage broking business. Oh, you're in the hopes and dreams business. And I think it's a timely reminder that, we're trying to create lifestyle by design, and we do need tech, and we need we can get a competitive advantage if we invest in, cutting edge technology to allow us to facilitate that, because we can do more with less, which is the critical thing. I mean, we've had ideas that we would have loved to have implemented in 2012, 2013, but they just weren't scalable. They needed too much human interaction with them. And so we've had to wait until the technology can sort of catch up to the idea. And so we've been patient in as part of that process. But now, we're doubling down on the technology piece, because ultimately, if we execute well, I mean, it could just be a complete waste of money. But if we execute well, it could also mean that, it puts us in that next step. And what I'm saying to my team is, what got us here today won't get us where we want to go tomorrow. And so that's what we have to keep challenging. And, that's my job as effectively the person who runs the strategy of the group, is to try and work out what things do we need to sub out and bring in that's going to get us to that next phase of growth. And we've got ambitious targets of creating 10,000 financially free households. So that means that effectively they don't have to work. So we've serviced 10,000 households across our group of companies, but it's now the next phase of that. We have 7 grades of financial wellbeing. And so grade number 6 is financial peace. Grade number 7 is financial contribution. That's when you're paying it forward or, doing the philanthropic work that you want to do. But we're measuring everyone to grade 6. And so we're now going to, through the platform, we'll be able to work that out. So we've got an algorithm that works out where they sit in terms of that 7 grades. And we will then start to measure our success based on getting 10,000 households to financial peace.
Yeah, love it. And for the guys that did the session with me over the last week or so, we had a model that was similar to that, right? When I had legacy at the top of my model, where you've got, but again, it's getting those clients to self-identify where they are, right? So in the sort of the pyramid. So I love it. In terms of this must take a lot of work on yourself. And you mentioned that lifelong learning. And one of the things that we've been focused on is unlocking potential, right? And I know you've got this abundance mindset, and I haven't asked you what you do to cultivate it, but I know there's something that you must do in terms of your habits and daily routines to cultivate the mindset. So what do you do on a daily basis for this learning and mindset?
Yeah, it's a good question. I am a bit obsessive about the vision and the purpose of what we're here for. Mm-hmm. So I resonate as high recognition. So if anyone who's done all of those sort of, in that particular case, this is the Hogan profiling tool that we use in our business. And so I've got high recognition. So this sort of stuff where I'm sharing also, sort of, I suppose, gives me that nice feeling that I'm, that I'm being recognized or whatever. So that's part of that sort of subliminal motivation that I have. But in terms of the learning that I do and the stuff that I look at, I'm very, very big on the Harvard Business School stuff. So they've got some unbelievable podcasts that are free to get access to. Cold Call is one of them. You can also, they do these amazing case studies. And so when you're looking at the case studies, you can see, because effectively what Harvard's approach to understanding is this idea that we learn from experiences of what looks like great success and what doesn't look like great success. Where were the failures? What do we learn from those? So it's learning, it's rather than sort of intellectual theory, it's actual practical assessment of what's working well for Amazon, Disney, and all of those other companies, great companies around the world. And they synthesize that into these great little sort of case studies. And you can get so much gold out of those case studies in terms of taking your time, in terms of reading through those. In terms of podcasts that I'm listening to, you're sort of, from a technology and development point of view, probably your research areas like Gartner. They have a podcast that they do, the All In Pod. I've been listening to that for many, many years. Where it's sort of 4 guys basically who are businessmen, very successful venture capitalists and so forth. They go about that. There's an awesome podcast. Now you've got me thinking. Starting Greatness is another unbelievable podcast by one of the venture capitalists out of Silicon Valley, whose name is escaping me, but it is a fabulous podcast. When you are listening to that, make sure that you start with the interview of the person first before you do the summary, because what he does is he does 2 pods. He does the interview first and then he summarizes it in a separate podcast. So if you're listening to the summary and you don't get the full story, you're really not getting the depth of the conversation that's going on. There's some good ones. In terms of, I do listen to the CBA Economist podcast, the Dismal Science, from an economic point of view. There's a couple of good pods out there, but there's a plethora of ways, but I'm very much audio. So if I'm doing my Saturday 2-hour walk, if I'm on my rower on every morning, the routine is headphones in, podcast, which one am I going to listen to? And that gets me through sort of 20 minutes of exercise every morning. Anytime I'm mowing the lawn, you'll hear me having the headphones in. So I'm an audio consumer more so than video. And then when I find something that's quite interesting, I would then go and look at YouTube in terms of, say, ChatGPT. I'm doing a lot of work in terms of that space at the moment. I see that being a very excellent tool, and it's just a tool. It's not going to take our jobs, well, not in the next 10 years anyway, but it's just a tool. So think of it as a tool. Don't think of it as, if you're anti-change and anti-technology, you're going to be restricted. You will be swallowed up, because the world is changing towards this next platform change, which is this generative AI. So you've got to make sure that, either your aggregator's doing something about this in terms of how they're plugging it in, but it's going to make you go faster and do more with less. So that's a really interesting one. And Tim Ferriss's, some of those, studying the greatness of those people. Lex Friedman, he's another one that I listen to, where he's got an expert that I'm interested in listening to around, I don't know whether it's the next big thing in AI, or whether it's, sports science or whatever that looks like. It just depends on the mood that I'm in. There is a book that I'm just about to finish, which I think is quite interesting. You may have already read it, but it's called The Rational Optimist. So I'm big on audio books, and this one, The Rational Optimist by Matt Riley, that I'm listening to at the moment. That's if you get caught up in the day-to-day, this book will give you some really good global historical comfort in knowing that, obviously commerce and capitalism and everything we're doing in helping people is actually moving us forward in a huge way. And that sort of comes back to that whole idea of abundance and helping others. But there's a couple. But
love it. And I think that answers, right. And I asked this question to Aaron yesterday, and of all the successful people I meet, they work harder on themselves than they do in their business, right? And I can just see by the number of different podcasts and areas that you're taking in sort of information, that you've done a lot of work. And because if we want to create new thoughts and we want to grow our business, we can't have that same level of thinking. That a lot of us fall into the trap where we have the 95% of the same thoughts and feelings, and so we're just basically reliving our life over and over again. Whereas what you're doing, you're inputting great information, which is then you're implementing that into your business.
Yeah, look, if I can add just one point, that's the thesis of Matt Riley's book. The thesis is, through exchange and sharing, innovation accelerates, right? And we all get better, and then we all have better ideas. And through those better ideas, we actually move society in the better direction. And so it's a beautiful flywheel in terms of what that looks like. And that's also another great framework tool is the flywheel from Jim Collins. If you haven't studied the flywheel concept from Jim Collins, that's also a brilliant, really simplistic tool that will allow you to think deeply about your business, and it works on the sort of premises of, if I did this, then it's almost impossible for this not to happen. And if I did this, it's almost impossible for this not to happen. And that creates the business flywheel in terms of, business success. And there's a study in there from Amazon in terms of how they adopted the flywheel concept very early on in their business and became obviously the success story that they are today.
Love it. Love it. All right. There's been so much, right? From, the systems, from the financial freedom, from the choices, from your whole funnel, from the value proposition, through to, how you've hired brokers, through the confidence that they need to be successful, through your 10 sort of points of, the things that they need, and now into the things that obviously you do. So I'm keen to hear from the audience and our members. Like, what's the biggest takeaways? What's resonating for you? What are those sort of business boosting ideas for you that you're taking away? And put those into the chat now so we can, again, something you may have picked up, others haven't. But just write down your biggest takeaways at this point, because there's so much gold, so much gold. Thanks so much, Ben.
No worries.
work harder on yourself than the business. So Ryan's asked a question, can we flesh out the Q and serve a little bit more? A bit. Developing self is the key to success. All of it, says Brian. Gold, thank you. I agree. All of it is just super, super valuable. Great growth story. Yeah, amazing. Complete rethink of what success looks like, says Richard. The accounting, financial planning, and bro is a great full holistic suite business model. Hiring for attitude and training for skill. Yeah, lots to absorb, but also just great success story. Yeah, definitely. And again, it'll be on the portal for the members, so you don't have to take it all in today. You can go back and you can watch it as many times as you want. All right. So
you want me to quickly answer the question around the Q and serve?
Yeah, let's go. Yeah,
it's pretty easy to. So effectively, what a lot of basic workflow systems, they will normally say, here's a task, and that task is usually going to be performed by my assistant. And so that's a one-to-one model, right? Now, the one-to-many model, the best way I describe it to my team when I was explaining it to them is, you know, when you go to maybe a deli and you grab a ticket, that's the one-to-many serve. So basically, the people behind the counter can serve that because they've been able to, you know, call the next ticket up, and that's just a quicker way of getting through the workflow. So how you do it in your business is you might, again, have the task coming up. And when that task comes up, there's a thing called a round robin, or a system that it'll give it to the next available person. So the technology will basically know, it'll circulate that through. So it means that if there's, you know, I don't know, pricing requests, valuations to order, all of those things can potentially be trained up as a competency, and then it basically serves that up to the next available person. And then obviously from that point of view, when you're building these systems, you also need to have accountability around those. So because you've then allocated those out, you can start to see, when you've got multiple staff, you can see who's getting through their workflows quicker than who isn't getting through those workflows. So you can identify areas for training and improvement, or you can identify areas where potentially, you know, that person may be distracted or not performing at the highest level that they can perform at. So that's the idea behind, you know, when you first start out, you would normally start out with one support staff to one advisor. So it's a one-to-one task relationship. But as you get bigger and bigger, and say, you know, in our case, I think we've got 13 brokers or 14 brokers in our group, you know, the average settlement size of those brokers is over $65 million per year. And so we obviously try and work it so next to those are the associates coming through, but then ultimately the whole settlements team is a Q and serve model. So we don't have to wait for these people to be looking after that. We move towards, okay, here's the next thing that needs to be done for this file. Here's the thing that next, and that just means that we can do a lot more settlements with less staff. So I think in our settlements team, we've got 5 people or 4 people, and we're sort of settling that sort of 120 million, 100 to 120 million a month type range.
Yeah, love it, love it. So what system, Pete said, do you use for the Q and serve?
Yeah, so I was mentioning the CRM system that we use, which is Keep. So that has a workflow tool built into it. So you're still working with the things called decision diamonds and workflow tools. And most decent CRMs these days have the ability to build that yourself. So it's a sort of a drag and drop build. And so you'll understand these concepts of round robin. And then you'll attach the workers to that in terms of the people who will be part of that round robin. And then that will sort it out in terms of who it serves. So that's the system we use. But as I was just mentioning before, we're looking to move to either, you know, Microsoft Dynamic or to Salesforce as part of building that service suite out.
Yeah, love it. All right. Where can you get the Harvard case studies, cold calls? Is that YouTube?
Yep. So just there's the Harvard Business Review, which is the sort of main website that you can go to. And so, you know, Harvard, I think Business Weekly or something like that. But if you just go to Harvard Business, you Google Harvard Business, that'll take you to their website. And then if you listen to Cold Call, they interview the professor. So it's always the professor who writes the business case. So they're business professors. And so listen to a few of those cold call podcasts, and then that will also take you through into their environment through the show notes or show description or whatever as well. But then once you subscribe, you are going to get bombarded. One thing that Harvard does very well is they absolutely hit you pretty hard in your inbox in terms of offering you subscriptions and so forth. And there is the 10 pack, which is also a brilliant set of books, which is again, I was thinking whether I had it in my site here, but I don't. It's in one of the other offices. So their book on strategy is phenomenal in terms of I think it's Drucker that says cultural eat strategy for breakfast, but it's Porter. I think it's David Porter who did basically the 5 core elements of strategy. It's fascinating. It's very, very cool stuff if you want to get deep into to building a sustainable competitive advantage business.
Love it. What was your motivation when you started out as a broker, and what resources, like if you think back in the day? And I noticed when I looked at your book in the blurb here, it said you had 20 staff back in 2016, right? Yeah. So, wind the clock back a little bit. And what was your motivation, and what was the sort of the vision back then? Yeah,
so there was always the vision that, so I used to go to these, workshops or seminars that were run by property spruikers and all these different people, and you would sort of work out who the big spruikers were. So yes, I went and saw Henry Kay. I went and saw Peter Spann, I think it was, and I'd seen Monica Wokelin and a few others. And so you would start to work out who was credible and who was basically trying to flog you something. And it always used to struck me as the number of people that were gullible and were signing up for these big courses and all of that type of thing. And I'd be sort of saying, I'll take a little bit of those. So 80% of what they said was true, but the last 20% was rubbish. And so I then thought to myself, if this is going to be a place that I want to play in, what I need to do is have a holistic business approach. So, because then you go and get advice from your accountant, and they'd say different things, and your broker would say different things to your accountant. And so there was all of this mixed messages. And so the vision was a central place where you could come into, so the visualization I had was a big building, and effectively you had all these group of specialists. And then ultimately you would have a board table, and on that board table, you would be the chairman of the board as the household, and all of these people would be working for you in terms of providing you a seamless, holistic approach and advice. And you wouldn't be confused, you wouldn't be overwhelmed. They'd all be consistent in their messaging. And that was the sort of vision story that I said. So there's that story state strategy playing itself out. And that's what I rolled with. But I always knew that I needed to do an apprenticeship. And I always knew that property was a game of bricks and mortar. So it's obviously, the finance was going to be the key bit to the property story. So I started there, but there was always that vision. And the reason why I left Mortgage Choice is they told me that I couldn't talk about property investing. So I went and got my QPIA, my Qualified Property Investment Advisor, and I said, here's what I want to do. And they said, sorry. And the irony now is they do all of the stuff that I said I was going to do, and they said I couldn't do back in 2005, 2006. And that's when I said, all right, well, my time with Mortgage Choice is done. And then I rebranded to my own brand, and then I aggregate under AFG. And I've been with AFG now since that time. So that's the backstory. But the reason why AFG was good, because at the time they had financial planning, and so they could make me go quicker. But ultimately, in the end, we decided to bring everything in-house and control it from a comms point of view to customer. And then we're ultimately in control of the outcome. Because always the challenge was in referral partners for me was, are they going to be consistent in the message? Are they going to be consistent in the service? And so I decided to control it all. And that's the origin story.
Love it. So good. So good. And, it must be cool to sit back and say, this is my sort of vision when I was, leaving Mortgage Choice back in sort of 2006, 2007. And then to see what you've created and having 120 staff and all those services. And as you say, turnover of over 20 mil. It must be pretty cool to look back and see, or do you not look big? Do you not look back? Do you look forward?
I don't spend a lot of time looking back. I've got to be honest. I mean, I should do more of that because I think it's important for just, understanding what has happened. And I think that's good for balance. But I am very much a forward-looking person. I can see the amount of opportunity that's out there in terms of helping more people. And I'm just dumbfounded at the number of Australians that really do make really interesting decisions with their money. They're just clueless in terms of, the impact that they're having on their futures. And so I'm really passionate about changing people's lives around, making smarter decisions with their money. That's why we just introduced the wealth clock and wealth speed concept, right? Because of exactly that people just don't know the problem that they're going to have. So how do you tell them about a problem they don't know they've got in the future? You've got to try and bring an indicator tool into the present that will hopefully just sort of snap them into an idea that, actually, that wealth speed's not going as quick as it should be. And when I look at my wealth clock, I'm a little bit, behind the eight ball.
Yeah. Well, we're up for time now, Ben. And again, it's been a jam-packed hour of just gold, so much value in terms of that you've delivered. And as I said, I think that people will have to go back and watch it a couple of times to get everything that you've said and to really comprehend it. You've got the books. That's one way that you can sort of learn more about Ben and his philosophies. But if people want to learn more about you and hear you more, where can they check you out, Ben?
Well, I think the podcast is probably, if you want to learn more about our investment thesis and theories, that's a good spot to start. And if you want to hear me ranting and raving, you can follow me on Twitter. I've got a few opinions about our government as well. So in terms of their super stuff and what they do for property investing and all, they're just wrecking it for the rest of everyone. So anyway, I've got a few opinions there.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Again, so much value. Thanks so much.